So when Nancy Beatty took office, one of the first things council did was set her salary because she was no longer the admin head of the city.
Right. Okay.
And that was, I don't remember why I was watching this council meeting. Maybe I found like a news article about it and was watching a snip. But it was brutal. Like,
yeah.
Oh. All right. Want to let the group in?
Let's do it.
Good evening, everybody. Our second to last meeting, and I know it's been a while since our July one, but it's hard to believe that we're almost done. Didn't get a lot of responses back yet on the latest charter shell that we sent out. So if you do have any comments, please do send those in. And we'll spend a lot of time at our next meeting, so talking through everything. We do have a couple guest speakers with us tonight, still waiting on one of them to join us, but hi, Steve. Glad to see you.
Happy Monday, everyone.
It's 5:30. All right, good evening, everybody. As the nice lady just let us know, this meeting is being recorded. It is also being live streamed and available on YouTube after this meeting is over. And then just please remember to use the raise hand feature before speaking. So at the bottom of your screen, you should see a reactions button, and there's a little raise hand. And then I think even if you sometimes have the setting on where you like raise your hand, it knows, and it's a little creepy. So just a refresher for the reason for tonight's topic and our meeting and all of that, because I know it's been a really long time. I was looking at it today. The genesis for our topic tonight came from March. So back in March, when we were talking about high-speed transit, and in particular, the clause that had now sunset in the charter, but that did require a public vote for the city to spend any resources on high-capacity transit. And this group ended up not being able to come to consensus. So the sunset clause of that charter did stay, but there was interest in just general taxes and fees of the city and how those get set, what rules and restrictions are on those, and what processes the city follows. And then if there's any appetite for any restrictions beyond those. So still waiting on Eric. Any questions about kind of how we came to the point that we're at tonight? Trying to refresh from several months ago. Margaret, please.
Yes, the only question I have, this goes back to what you just were talking about. Because I know when that light rail thing came up, it was basically one group that was, I won't say well-funded, but had quite a bit of money that pushed that through. And so was it the consensus of the group to keep to not have a sunset clause in it?
No, this group couldn't come to consensus on whether or not to continue that clause or to remove it. And because you all didn't come to consensus, the sunset clause stayed.
Okay, because it was not only light rail, it was always also high capacity and a couple of other things, and some things that we really don't have a say in, especially on 99 and Hall Boulevard for the moment.
Yeah, so. Absolutely. Thank you for the clarifying question. John, please.
Yeah, Margaret, it was more of
the concern that I had was related to elections and not the fact that that was there. It was more of the political atmosphere of would that group reunite and try and vote down the charter, or would we want to keep something in there, even though, like you said, a lot of it we don't have a say about anyway, so it really didn't affect them as much as they thought it did. So it was more about politics and elections than it was related to wanting to have that left in there.
Okay, thank you, John.
Thanks, John. And Karen, please.
And my memory was that it would be gone because it has already expired. So we're not really going to put in expired language, are we?
No.
Okay.
It's sunset, it is removed, and it has not been in any of the charter shells that you've received. All right, so we do have our second guest speaker. Eric has arrived. Eric and Steve, would you like to introduce yourselves before we start the presentation?
Yeah, absolutely. Eric is having a little technical difficulty, so I'm not sure if he's completely connected to us yet. But I'll start with the introductions and let's see if that buys Eric just a little more time. First, thanks for having me. I'm Steve Reimer, city manager here. Been the city manager now for 2.5 years. So appreciate all the efforts of the Charter Review Committee. Big kudos and thanks you. As Kim said, this is one of your final meetings, and there's a Herculean effort that we asked all of you to tackle. And it sounds like you've been doing a great job working through many topics, ultimately for our council and then the community to decide on. So I am going to start the presentation. I just want to see if Eric has, now I don't see him anymore. Do you see him on your end, Kim?
No, he just disconnected.
So if we can just give him a second here, if that's all right.
Yeah.
I'm in conversation on a text here, so let me see what I can find out. 1 second.
Mhm. I see he's reconnected. Perhaps.
And Kim, this is Carol. I'm having trouble with my camera. I can't seem to turn it on this Chromebook. So
Yeah, you just look like a black box. That might be what's
Yeah.
happening to Eric too. I think Steve probably just ran over to Eric's desk. It's actually kind of amazing we haven't had more technical difficulties doing this all on Zoom. Other than that first breakout room test, it's gone pretty smooth.
Thanks for your patience. So his computer keeps crashing. He's going to try to jump on here with his phone. So hopefully we'll see him pop up here in a second, and then we can get going to respect everyone's time.
And Carol was saying that she's having issues on her computer as well.
Okay.
I can't get the video to work. Oh. Is Eric on site?
I think so. Looks like he just disconnected again. Maybe he's connecting up his phone. Eric, are you with us? Oh, nope.
Hi, I am here. Are you able to hear and see me?
We are.
Perfect. Thanks, Eric.
Great. Sorry about the technical difficulties.
No worries. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Eric King, and I am the interim finance director. And I believe I'm here to talk to everyone about fees and charges.
Oh, we changed the topic. Sorry, Eric. We're going to talk about something different.
Want me to start, Kim, and you're gonna run the
Yep.
slideshow for everyone?
There you go.
Great. Want to just advance to the next one. So once again, thanks for having us here, and thanks back a couple of months or a few months back asking about this topic be put on your agenda. Eric and I just want to spend a few brief minutes making the presentation, and then more have a Q&A or conversation with all of you. So some of the key things we want to talk about are Oregon's property tax system, just our budget process, you understand that. And then Eric's going to share some of the practices that have been in place here for many, many years with the current and former city councils and mayors, as well as the team that's been here for a number of years. So it's my understanding you always are posed with a question or two or three for each meeting on what we're asking you to respond to today. So I will read these. So the first one is, does the committee recommend that the current limitations and processes regarding levying fees and taxes are sufficient? And then if not, what charter provisions would the committee recommend? So one of the things I just mentioned, this organization, this community has a long history of being responsible stewards of public funds. And it goes back many, many years, and you can see some of the examples that are here. And we're extremely proud of being a Triple Crown winner in the 3 different categories there for our financial operation, primarily led by our finance department, though at the same time, it's the way the city council obviously provides their leadership, and then all the different things that happen in all the operating departments that lead into that. Also, because of the efforts that we've had, we were extremely proud last year to receive the AAA rating by Standard & Poor's, which, as many of you know, is the highest rating that a community can receive. And so that only assists us as we are looking at potential borrowings or other related things related to the finances of this organization. So I don't think we can underscore the importance of a AAA rating enough. There's multiple handfuls across the country, but at the same time, there's many that are AA plus, AA3, or other ones that are just behind AAA ratings. So Tigard's in a very good position as it relates to its ratings with Standard & Poor's. So just a couple of comments about the Oregon property tax system. So over the course of the last multiple decades, this has evolved, as many of you on this call know, and it's really put limitations on local governments on how we may impose taxes. And so there's really the permanent rate that we're going to talk about briefly with all of you, that we have local option levies like our police levy that we have in place today, and we'll be going to the community in May of 24, and then the voter approved general obligation bonds, and we'll talk about those as well. So the 2 ballot measures that are often referenced are from the 1990s, ballot measure 5 and ballot measure 50. These I've put some of the examples of how they put the limitations on local governments in terms of our ability to utilize property taxes to fund services. And it's important because one of the primary ways that cities do fund their services and communities is through property tax. And so we have the limitations on it in our permanent tax rate that limits our ability to fund the expectations of our community in terms of the service levels that they expect. So one of the things that, many of us that all pay taxes, we pay property taxes, and I think many people think that their local government receives the majority of it. Well, it's the case that we actually here receive about 18 cents on the dollar compared to the other taxing jurisdictions. And so once again, all the taxes are being paid, only a portion of those, and a smaller portion are being paid to the city, which drives our need to look at other revenue opportunities. And Eric's going to touch on those in a while, but I think this is a key piece of that. Another key piece of it is the our permanent property tax rate that you'll see here, the 2.5131 per $1,000 assessed value. Eric's going to show you a graph how we compare to others, but we're on the lower end of that, which once again really puts limitations on our ability to generate revenues through the property tax system. One thing to note, the League of Oregon Cities, this organization through the council's direction, we've always been looking at opportunities for property tax reform to address some of these issues. And so something that may go on for many more years until a reform happens, but it's a continual conversation at the state level and amongst many communities throughout the state. So just a couple pieces about our budget committee. So we are required to have a budget committee. So the council appoints 6 community members to it, and 5 of them being the voting members, and then we have an alternate. It's typically chaired by one of the community members, and then our city council makes up the remainder. And so every year we convene the budget committee, and that's how we start our formal budget process. That's how we ensure that we have public participation, not only through the community members, but also through the public comment period that we have in person and writing virtually now, in a variety of ways to make sure that our community is aware and able to be engaged in our budget process. So just to give you a sense, if you didn't follow closely from home in terms of our fiscal year 24 budget, which was just adopted and is now went into effect on July 1st. As I mentioned, we typically kick that off in January. This year, as a side note, the budget committee and the city council asked to start having a quarterly meeting. So we will be coming back in October of this year, actually, with some focused agenda items. But we typically kick it off in January, really go through the process, talk about some of the assumptions that we're using, get a sense from the budget committee if we're in alignment there on how we should proceed. After working through that meeting, then really the majority of time is spent internally, and the departments developing their operating budgets. We're developing our capital improvement program and trying to take the council's goals, our strategic plan, things that we know are a priority to our community, and aligning the resources with those goals and priorities. Ultimately, then presenting it to our budget committee, once again in public, with a full day discussion. This year it was on April 22nd, so it's typically a Saturday. We spend the entire day. This year, I heard, I've gone through 3 processes now. We had a dozen or so speakers at that and different public comments. So many people said this was one of the more engaged processes that we had, which was great because this is really a chance for the community to share their thoughts. From there, then we have 2 evening meetings. This year it was May 1st and 8th. Typically, we focus then on our Town Center Development Agency, or the TCDA, or TIF funding. Talk about that budget because it is separate from the city's budget. And then a variety of follow-up items from the committee. They're either generated by the committee members, meaning the committee members or counselors, or members of the public that are sending in their comments or verbally making comments to us. And then we follow up actively with those. And it typically takes a meeting and a half to follow up on the variety of items to make sure that there's clarity and transparency in our budget process. And then ultimately that leads to a recommendation by the budget committee, which the council then considers. This year they formally adopted the budget on June 13th. So you can see it takes in the neighborhood of 5 months of the public process. We do start earlier than that as a team in November or so, starting to pull together some of the information. Just my last comments here is why we're telling you this is I think it's important for all of you to understand that we really strive to be transparent with our process, make sure that we're engaging our community, listening to the community and responding to the community's needs. Part of that is making sure everything is available to the community. Most of that is through our website, obviously, and that the public involvement does influence the decisions, and sometimes it influences us for that year, or there's follow-up items like we have this year where the budget committee and the council has asked for us to follow up on items that were not put in the current budget, but they want to learn more for consideration of funding at a future time. And so it is very much a process that is just continues. And so there's a start and an end, but ultimately we're already building towards next year's budget process improvements we can make. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Eric. He's going to give you some more of the details now as it relates to fees and charges and some of our revenues. And then we're happy to answer any questions you may have. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve, for that overview. And thank you, everyone, for giving this opportunity for me to speak and share more about the revenue for the city. This first slide right here that we have on the annual revenue demonstrates kind of the overall picture and the landscape of where our funding comes from. And so as you can see, our total annual revenue budget is roughly about $150 million. And as Steve mentioned earlier, there's that 17 cents per every dollar that comes into that you pay for property tax comes to the local government. Well, if you see on this chart, only 17% of that property tax is actually a portion of our annual, whereas fees and charges make up about 44% of the total revenue for the city. So that just kind of gives you a big overview on where all our revenues come from and what makes up the different pieces of pie that we use to support services to the city.
Jason, please.
Yeah, just as we're looking at this slide, Eric, could you comment on, I think this is, I think I know the answer to the question, and I think it means to me that there may be some more context that would be helpful for people to think about here. Can you just verify that the charges for services section includes the water and sewer utilities income and revenue? Is that correct?
That is correct. And this is intended to be a holistic view of all the fees and or all the revenues of the city. So the enterprise funds, which as your are the lines of service that you're mentioning, the water, stormwater, sewer, and those are captured under charges for services. And
I think just making sure everybody understands that, and also the size of that amount, that is really those are services the city provides, but they're, I think, pretty distinctly, in my mind, just like I wouldn't consider like PGE, for example, if somehow we decided we were going to start providing electricity, I don't know that I would consider all that revenue that's running through and then being, we're collecting revenue and then we're paying a bunch of expenses. I don't know that I would, it's such a large amount that it starts to, in my mind, when you're looking at this graph, it sort of makes it hard to even make sense of, because in this context, it looks like property tax, this is my concern. It makes it look like property tax revenue, for example, is a relatively small amount of the money that's used to fund the general government operations. And that's just simply not true. And this graph represents that it might be true, but that's mostly because you've got hundreds of millions of dollars running through the enterprise funds every year or two. And so I think that's really important context for people to have as they're looking at this. Sorry for interrupting, but I think it's important.
Thanks, Jason. And Zachary, can your question wait to the end, or is it related to what Jason was just speaking about?
sorry, what was that, Kim?
Oh yeah. I was just kind of thinking it was kind of interesting how property tax was a pretty small amount, because you'd think it'd be a lot bigger than the other annual revenue sources.
Thanks, Zachary. Eric, you ready for the next slide?
Sure. So I'll be going over the history of fees and charges for the city. Just to reiterate what I said earlier about the overall percentage of where the city gets its revenue. About 70% of the total revenue comes from property taxes. And really, as Steve mentioned earlier, state law with Measure 50, Measure 5 really put limitations on how governments can increase property tax, which really can only be done through bonds and levies that must go through a voter approval process. And in order to adequately support city services, fees and charges have been passed through city council by ordinance, which I'll be talking about in future slides. So this slide is an overall picture of where Tigard lands in the greater Washington County region on how we compare in terms of our permanent tax rate. So the Tigard's permanent tax rate is the $2.51 per thousand of assessed value, which is among the lowest in the county and in the state. If you compare it to the outside of the outlier of Gaston, city of Gaston, we're close to half of the top three municipalities. If you look at the state average, which is it's actually $4.62, we're also nearly half of that as well. Next slide. And so the way the city has passed bonds and levies in the past, this is a overview of the general obligation bonds, which are commonly referred to as GO bonds, and you might hear that term getting thrown around or used in many different contexts. But GO bonds are essentially debt issuances by the city that are approved by the voter. And these are paid for by property tax over the life of a debt issuance. And they're typically used to fund capital projects. And so if you look back in history in 2002 and in 2010, the voters did approve a library and parks general obligation bond that was used to fund the current library that's in existence today, and then also for park development throughout the city. Now, local option levies are slightly different from GO bonds because these aren't debts that are issued by the city. Rather, these are increases to property tax for a limited duration that cannot exceed 5 years. So back in 2020, there was a levy that was on the ballot to approve a police services levy that was to hire critically needed patrol officers. And that is that was approved in May 2020 for a 5-year term. And that also means that the levy will be actually coming back to the voters in 2024 for a renewal. And Steve, did you want to comment on that at all?
No, that's all right, Eric. Why don't you go ahead?
Okay. So for this next slide on ordinances, so in 2003, 2007, and 2016, City Council voted unanimously to pass 3 different fees and charges. And these are the street maintenance fee, and there's a restructure of the business license fee, and then the parks and recreation fee. So for that first one, the street maintenance fee, that was to support the city's street infrastructure. There was a growing need to maintain the infrastructure of the city. And the business license fee, this was unique to Tigard in that we wanted to establish a commercial crimes unit, one of the first in the nation, I believe, back in 2007. And these are police officers dedicated to supporting the Tigard business community. And then so for the 2016 ordinance on the parks and recreation fee, this was specifically to partially support the maintenance operation of the parks and recreation programming.
Jeanette, please.
Yeah, thanks, Curtin. You may have covered this, but this is what folks would see on their City of Tigard utilities billing, correct? Those past 2, you mentioned the street maintenance as well as the Parks and Rec fee.
Correct. The Parks and Rec fee and the street maintenance fee are both on the utility bill, and those do not flow through the enterprise funds. The utility bill is just the vehicle used to assess those charges, assess and collect those charges.
Thank you.
So this next slide is on the enterprise funds. And as mentioned earlier, the enterprise funds is a large portion of the city's revenues. This is the services for water, stormwater, and sewer. And a key thing to highlight with the enterprise funds is that these are intended to be self-supporting lines of service for the community, meaning that the enterprise funds cannot subsidize other programs. For example, the water revenue cannot be used to purchase police vehicles or any other non-enterprise related expenditures. And for each utility system for water, sewer, and stormwater, they undergo a community-involved system plan development process. And that's really to determine the infrastructure and operating needs of each utility system.
Zena, I see your hand.
Regarding the street maintenance fee, does that street maintenance funding only comes from the street maintenance fee from the utility billing, or is there any other funding comes, like state funding or something else for the street maintenance?
So for the current, I'm not sure if I'm the best person to answer this, but for in general, so our current process for funding operate for maintenance of the roads, following our pavement, to keep our streets at the, can't remember right the terminology. There's an index, pavement index, to maintain at the right pavement index. The funding for the street maintenance fee is used to do like the slur seals, maintenance of the road, so that there aren't, they're maintained at a high standard.
And John?
Yeah, it's PCI, Pavement Condition Index. And the street maintenance fee does mainly for repairs, slurry seals, overlays, and crack seal. But we also have gas tax money that we get from the state that helps get us new roads. We'll also get sometimes money from the county. There's other fees that we can get from the county to help build new roads, like Roy Rogers expansion or Bull Mountain expansion. Those all came from other county MISTIP funds, Major Streets Improvement Program. So there's a lot of other funds that come into building new roads, but it's mainly for keeping up the roads that for maintenance. But the biggest thing that people don't understand, it's only for the maintenance of the roads that are within the city's purview. So not within the city limits, but just the ones we own. So not one that the county owns or not one that the state owns. So Hall Boulevard, 99W, 217, the state owns those. Beef Bend Road, part of Bull Mountain, the county owns. So there's other ones that Greenberg Road, Hall Boulevard, the county owns part of those. So other jurisdictions own those. So our maintenance fees are only for ones that are city streets.
Thank you for that distinction. One thing I would just highlight and maybe add on to that is the street maintenance fee really, like you said, is the just to maintain the roads, not for the construction of new roads. And that's where the gas tax comes in. And those two are kept distinct in our financials.
Thanks. And Zachary, please.
Yeah, so I have a question. I see a sign every once in a while that says like Adopt a Road program. Do you think you might be able to explain that, or is that not really related to the street stuff?
That's a volunteer. Oh, go ahead, Steve.
Nope, go ahead if you're gonna go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, Adopter is generally like a volunteer program for like cleaning up the sides of the street. So like a group like volunteers to do that on a regular basis, and then they get their name put on the sign, but it's unrelated to the street maintenance. All right, Eric, are you next slide or?
Yeah. So just to wrap things up, so the key items I want to highlight on the fees and charges is that the city really, we do have one of the lowest permanent tax rates in the state and in the region, as we showed with that graph in that chart in one of the previous slides. In the city's practice for adjusting fees and charges, they all include the public. So whether it's the GO bonds or the levies, the ordinances, and including the enterprise funds, these all go through a public process. And the inability to raise any revenues could lead to a reduction of services and potentially unreliable service delivery for our utility systems as well.
Thanks, Eric. So for this group, keeping in mind our question from the beginning, which is kind of what do we want to see in the charter that could add extra protections or limitations on the city's ability to levy taxes and fees? Do you have any questions? And Tony, please start us off.
I had a question about that kind of a sliver in that pie chart. It was about fines, and I didn't hear anything about how that is controlled. Is that something that the city has any control over? Is that state regulated? kind of seems like that would be a potential way to increase some revenue if there was additional fines assessed for, bad behavior and bad community members.
I'll take that. So we have, as you said, a sliver, fines and forfeitures. A lot of that comes through our police department. One of the things that we work on even with our courts is we're not trying to be as much punitive as trying to change behavior. So we're typically not driving towards a fine first, versus like in this case, a judge would be an example. And the way our judge and our teammates, one being on this call right now, work with our community. So that's just one area. More in our traffic area, but just as an example of how we have them, but they're not heavily utilized, as you can tell.
So I'll also add that, yes, there are some statutory limitations on what we can assess. So typically if it's and Holly's nodding, she's probably an expert on this too. If it's a violation or a fine related to a state statute, those are all set by the state and a portion of that goes to the state. And so if it's like the crime of speeding, something like that would be set by statute, and we would only get a small portion of what the total fee is. So if it's set purely by Tigard Municipal Code, we have more latitude. But if it's a state statute violation, not only is the limitation set by the state statute, but we have to share it.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. And Derek, please.
Yeah, thank you, Eric and Steve, for joining and providing us this context. Really appreciate you guys coming here and sharing that presentation. Just a quick question related to one slide in particular, where you had referenced that charges on utility bills or for a specific line can't really apply to other areas. Like, for example, can't use revenue from a water bill to pay for police vehicles, right? As you wrote there. When I received my monthly bill, and this may be me misinterpreting the utility bill, but I understand it to be my water bill, but there's a line item there for roads, for example, and for parks and rec. Could you explain to me what I'm missing there with that? Like, how is it that those fees are on there if I understand it to be my water bill, or is it broader than that?
Yeah, so the bill that you receive on a monthly basis, so we do reference that as a utility bill because it doesn't cover just water. So the three enterprise services that are billed on your utility bill are the water, your sewer, and your stormwater. But then in addition to that, outside of those three, there's the street maintenance fee and then the parks and recreation fee, which are separate from the utility services. All five of those lines are tracked separately, and they don't subsidize any other program either. I just want to make that distinction. So like I was mentioning with the street maintenance fee, that can only be used for street maintenance. Park and rec can only be used for parks operations. And that goes along with the enterprise funds as well.
Just as a quick follow-up, what is to prevent the city from creating new lines in the future? What would, I understand the part of the presentation about robust public involvement, and I appreciate that aspect of it, but beyond that, any number of things that could otherwise come up in the future, like other than public involvement, is there anything else to prevent runaway government spending?
Eric, do you want Shelby and I to take that one?
Sure.
Yeah, so there's two other methods that we've talked about before in this group. One is for any fee that is levied as part of an ordinance. There is a public process where the public can refer that to a vote, and it does not require all that many signatures. I think we figured it out to be about 3,000 signatures, and then that ordinance would not go into effect and it would go to the ballot. The second is, we also talked about this last meeting, the option to recall an elected official. If citizens are upset with how your government officials are levying fees or adding charges to a bill, you always have that option. It also requires about 3,500 to 5,000 signatures to initiate a recall. But those are two other options in addition to just the public involvement that people have available.
Thank you.
John, please.
Yeah, Derek, to follow up on that a little bit, but that's not where I was going to go. But you look at the page that said fees paid by ordinance. The first one, the street maintenance fee. You know, that back in the day, you know, there's a lot of other cities that would love to have that. King City's failed multiple times trying to get that. So a lot of places, you know, luckily we have that in place. The second one, which the city business license, that was actually the businesses in Tigard coming together and saying, can you please increase our fees and add specific officers only for business? So from that aspect, it was the citizens or the businesses coming forward and saying, please help us. The last one, the park and rec fee, I will state right now that I voted against that and didn't want that on there. And I preferred it go to a vote of the people. And so, Derek, that's wholly my point of bringing this up. Is my concern is as more of these might pop on, yes, there's a public process, but they can get numerous and quite a few of them. And that's the worry is, number one is not only are they, you can add new ones, but you can increase the amount without the people really knowing about it. So I agree with you there, which is what my main point was, which is Sherwood's charter, section 47. Back in 2015, the former mayor ran a charter, ordinance, you know, a charter change forward that allows, they cannot increase or add a fee which would increase anything by more than 2%. So they can't raise garbage rates, water rates, so on and so forth, without a vote of the people. And so I'm not saying we should have that. My worry always was, and Jason will hear this, he's heard this multiple times, is it's not that we should have that. My worry is, how do we make sure we don't add too many fees and increases that will cause the citizens to want to put in a section 47 that Sherwood has into our charter? And so that's my worry, is how can we sort of self-maintain ourselves or put some handcuffs on or make sure we put good collars on to make sure that we don't get a little too zealous and put too many things on so that all of a sudden we get handcuffed on things that we don't want to. And so my worry of that, take an example. I just paid my home occupancy permit today for Washington County. It went up 54%. Well, that's a little more than the 2%. So I understand that there's a fee for service. I think our street maintenance fee, we do a really good job on keeping track of that. Our water rates, there's a fixed and a variable cost that go into that. And some people will disagree with the fixed cost, but the variable costs are very, you know, straightforward on what your costs are and making sure you have enough water for everybody. But I'm not sure every fee out there is. And I think that's where my worry of this is how do we make sure, and I don't think there's a way to do it, Shelby, how do we make sure that we caution ourselves before we end up in the situation where we end up like Sherwood?
Thanks, John. Karen, please.
Okay, well, first off, I will be the first person to say that all of our fixed rates need to be increased, and we need to be doing the advocacy work to make that happen. But having said that, recently, semi-recently, a gas tax was attempted in Tigard, yes. And there were comments made that, oh, well, if it doesn't pass, we'll just increase the street fee on the utility bill. So a little disappointing there as an example of what John was just talking about, of we attempted something and we went to the voters to say, do we want to add this tax? And the voters said no. So I don't know what the answer is to everything John was just saying, but I agree that we need to find something that, and I don't know if it's a percentage, I don't know if it's frequency, but something that should be in place that would help monitor the possibility of those kinds of fees getting out of control.
Thanks, Karen. And Jason, please.
And I think this is really coming down to sort of fundamental good governance, doing a good job as an elected official, making balanced decisions. And I actually probably have a fair number of things to say about this, so I guess I'll preface that from the get-go. Excuse me. it's interesting, even Karen, your perspective about the street maintenance fee and the gas tax. I actually thought the messaging and the real world situation was that we were going to be able to, if the gas tax passed, we'd actually be able to decrease or maintain the street maintenance fee. I actually think it might have been a decrease because people from outside the city were going to be paying, which was your city council's primary reason for pushing for a gas tax. People from outside the city use our streets. We think that they should pay for some of them. When we decide not to pass the gas tax, I don't think it's an option to just not maintain the stuff we own and to not maintain it. And the reason that matters and that all of us should collectively care about this, and I'm using this as an example, but I think it's a really good one, but extrapolate it further, is that the reason the councils before John Cook and I put the street maintenance fee in place was because keeping your pavement condition index above 80 is the cheapest long-term way to maintain your stuff. So we can choose, for example, to not fund the street maintenance at a level that gets our pavement condition index to 80. But what we're saying is we'd rather spend way more money per mile in the long run than to just maintain the stuff we have. And I think that's penny-wise, pound foolish and just poor governance. And leaving that whole thing just took me a few minutes to explain to you with a very focused discussion. Leaving those kinds of decisions in the hands of just voters that are going to listen to the yes gas tax, no gas tax message and not get into more of the detail, like it starts to make me wonder, having served as an elected official in the city for 10 years, why do we have elected officials? We spend hundreds to thousands of hours learning and going through all this stuff. Like, I strongly believe that the councils and the elected officials should be trusted to make many of these decisions. Now, do I think there should be maybe some sort of a check and balance on runaway stuff? Derek, you asked what prevents just anything from being added to your utility bill. I think the answer to that question was not as specific as it probably should have been, because whatever is being added has to be viewable and justifiable as a utility. It has to have an actual cost. You have to be able to describe what that cost is, and you can fund part or all of it through that type of a structure. But you can't just decide we're going to make the street maintenance fee $200 a month. That wouldn't be defendable because we're not spending $200 a month per household for street maintenance. So I think it's important to think through those sort of bigger picture things and what we're trying to achieve. I agree with John that the last thing we would want is in my opinion, is a Sherwood style either referendum or ordinance that ends up on the books that literally makes the jobs of the city council and your elected officials and frankly the staff very difficult to do. A lot of the costs or charges that we have are based on the cost of delivering a service. So like the building permits and the things that are in that sort of realm of the world are all done based on cost of service. Like there's an actual study done. How much does it cost to do X, Y, Z on average? And then how many of those do we get? And then they get divided out by the quantity and then you set the fee. Like that's literally how it's done. So if you were to say, okay, our labor went up by 5%, or this went up by 4.5%, we're doing fewer of them, but we still need the same number of people, or maybe somewhat less, but not completely straight line less. That's where you get into these kinds of problems. You end up in a situation where you're going to not be able to collect enough revenue to provide the service. So then are you going to stop doing the service? Are you going to, like, what are your choices then? Are you going to subsidize it? I guess I want everyone that's thinking about this, like, to think about these real issues. Like, this is all stuff John Cook, myself, Jeanette Shaw have to deal with And Karen, when you were on the school board, same kind of thing. Like these are the real tactical issues that come up. So I just hope you're thinking about those as you're thinking through this. Sorry for my long comments.
Thank you, Jason. Zachary, please.
Yeah, I mean, I was just saying that all fees and stuff kind of come first time. So a lot of like problems kind of arose over COVID. So it makes sense for prices to go up, but it wouldn't make sense for it to go up that much in terms of like fees and stuff and having to pay for them. But I get John Cook's point and Jason Schneider's point about how, you know, there is something that should be done, but we don't really know exactly what we should do. And it's just better to leave it to elected officials because they probably are doing most of the numbers.
Zachary. And Tony, please. Oh, Tony, you're muted.
Sorry, I took down my phone instead of my hand instead of the unmute. I guess I had a couple of questions. The pie chart, the kind of figuring out where the charter's influences on that. I know we had a discussion. One of our topics was to determine, you know, what we would want to change if the charter adequately allows, you know, the fees and the income that we think the charter should allow. Kind of curious which of those pieces of the pie we can kind of in the charter affect. And also, is there a way to kind of addressing those concerns? Is there a way to kind of hard code within the charters legally to kind of make adjustments specifically for inflation? Because like when it comes to fines and forfeitures, if there's a $100 fine for vandalism, well, $100 fine on a $9 an hour minimum wage is significantly different than a $100 fine on a $15 an hour minimum wage. So the kind of convincing people not to engage in bad behavior, if the fines don't have the same sting, then people aren't going to do them. And in the same aspect, you know, for your fees and your charges for services, if your income comes at a higher rate or your other fees adjust, but those don't, then that balance comes out of balance. That's kind of where my question is. Like a lot of the rates that are charged for higher level services like lawyers and technicians, those rates haven't raised in nearly the same proportion in most cases as the bottom has. So there's that delay. So if there was something kind of hard coded in there, I understand that it wouldn't really work well for property taxes because that's something that needs to be voted on, but maybe licenses and permits, charges for services, fines and forfeitures, someplace where we could hard code that might alleviate some of the drama.
So, Kim, do you want to go first?
No, all yours.
So I would suggest that's way too specific for the charter. So a couple things, the ever-changing landscape in terms of what the state legislature is doing. We mentioned before about where some of the money comes from. Intergovernmental is one of the pieces of the pie. What's going on with that? Another thing that comes to mind is that during COVID, City Council made the policy decision to waive some fines as a result of, say, restaurants who were really struggling when the state said that they could no longer operate for a certain time because of COVID. So if it's in the charter, it takes all of that discretion out of the hands of our city councilors. So I would suggest that, again, kind of returning to the higher level discussions of what belongs in the charter. And I would suggest we not go into that level of detail. That would be more of an ordinance discussion for city council.
Thanks, Shelby. Zachary, please.
So I have a question about if like total cost? Because I mean, it's just revenue, right? So it's just the money generated. It's not like all the, like, what about, is there any profit or like any net loss or net gain in terms of how Tigard's finances are working? That's my question.
So I can jump in. Thanks for the question. So we're not a for-profit operation here, and which adds the complexity of that funding stack that you're seeing. Even our enterprise funds, right? There has to be a nexus between the rates that you're charging through the rate study. So I'll use the water as an example. So the components of that are our capital plan. So what do we need to invest as a community into all the pipes and the aquifers and all the different infrastructure? And then what does it cost to maintain the system through your fixed rates, as we talked about, in your variable usage rates? So, but even an enterprise fund that's supposed to be self-supporting is not a for-profit venture. When you step back, so you have like the special revenue funds. And so a special revenue fund is like our park and recreation fund. So about rough numbers here, about 50% of our park and recreation costs that you reference are paid for by property taxes. And then the other 50% are paid through that utility charge that you see on the bill that we've referenced a couple of times. So once again, it's there's not a profit part to that. So we do have reserves. Reserves are not necessarily meaning that we have profits every year, but reserves are important for our ratings. They're important for cash flow and a variety of different things. So hopefully that's kind of getting to the bigger question that you asked.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Zachary. Jeanette, I did see your hand.
Yeah, I was going to mention similar to what Steve was saying about the profit versus nonprofit. So he took a little bit of what I was going to mention, but perhaps why I've got a little bit of the microphone here. I wholeheartedly hear John when he says we don't want to end up with Sherwood Section 47. I do think that we've got very good counselors who recognize that there could be recalls. They're also, I think all the councils have been very judicious with the money, recognizing that we are one of the lower tax jurisdictions, which is a benefit. If you talk to most people, they want to move to Tigard for that very reason, but also because we've been fiscally sound. Now, having said that, I do agree with Karen that there certainly needs to be an appropriate increase because we do need to maintain those roads. I would say some of the slurry may not even be up to par as we'd want them to be, but that could be an issue of low bid versus responsible bid, which is a whole different topic. But I think having said that, I just think there's mechanisms in place to ensure we don't get to a Sherwood Section 47. So thank you.
Thank you. Zachary, please.
I just have a question again about the reserves. Like, how much actual leftover money do we have from all this? Or do we have any? Or is it like none? Just kind of how it works for the nonprofit, like government.
Can't speak to the number. Maybe Eric can quickly look it up if you have it. But so we have reserves in all the different funds, our general fund, our water fund, our sewer fund, special revenue funds. And those reserves, as I mentioned, are really there for a few things. So I'm gonna keep using water because I think as former Mayor Cook talked about that and Snyder's talked about the water fund. So we know we have significant capital costs coming in the future related to water. And so you may see a very large number in the millions. But if you looked at our plan, that'll be expended over time as we make major infrastructure. Like right now, we have a $30 million contract out for our largest water project outside of what we did with Lake Oswego. So you'll see them, and those are used really to help make sure that rates are kept at a responsible level. And then you're utilizing some of the accrued revenue over the years to pay for items like that. The general fund, like I said, that's part of our rating. It's part of our cash flow. And that is used. The council may use it for one-time expenditures. They see something that they think is appropriate and try to fund something from reserves as well. Eric, do you want to add anything about reserves?
Sure, yeah. So I think one of the big things to highlight with the reserves, one thing you'll see with the budget is if you look at the total revenues, so there's approximately $150 million of revenue, but you'll also see that there's about $208 million in appropriation. And that's expenses basically. And the reason for that imbalance is because the reserves are used to pay for capital improvement projects that, like Steve mentioned, are multi-year. And there are specific requirements for based on the system development plans to maintain the systems at a level to deliver services. And so, like, our current reserve right now is 163 million for the FY24 budget, but that needs to carry us for the next several years to pay for our capital improvement projects.
Thanks, Eric. John, please.
Yeah, I think the thing that most people don't realize is the reserves is, he mentioned cash flow, but I don't think most people understand what that means. So the fiscal year of the city is July 1 to June 30. People don't, and the property taxes are assessed July 1 to June 30, but the property taxes don't get paid until November 15th, and then February 15th and May 15th. So you're talking quite a bit into that fiscal year. So you've got to actually have enough cash on hand from the year before to cover 50 to 75% of the next year's budget of the general fund just in cash flow. So, you know, I agree with Jason, is that property tax number looks really small on that. But if you look at our general fund, it's a really big number. And so that general fund is the money we can spend it on. We're talking library, police, so on and so forth. So those are the kind of things that I think we have to cash flow. We have to pay salaries, we have to pay benefits, we have to pay everything else. So we need a lot of that. People look and go, well, there's $160 million. Why am I paying taxes? Mainly, we have to pay that $208 million. You know, we got to pay 2/3 of that for the next year just to cash flow. And I don't think people understand that.
And if I can jump in just for clarity from former Mayor Snyder's comment earlier about the percent of property taxes that was just referenced again. So our property taxes pay for roughly 50% of our general fund. So it generates about 50% of our overall revenue needs.
Thanks, Steve. Jason, please.
Well, and when you guys are thinking about the general fund, that's really the things most of you generally think of as government services. So let's be real clear about that. Like, when you think of general government stuff, that's it. It's really the only space where the city council has much discretion. You know, we don't have debates about whether we should provide water or not. Like, that's not really a debate to have. So just, you know, that's where the action is, frankly, on the budget too.
And thanks for not having those debates about should we provide water. Very appreciated.
Appreciate that. So heard a lot of discussion. It's really interesting to me hearing this discussion because it goes back to a lot of the themes that we've had since the very beginning, especially one that's come up quite a bit, which is what happens when there's bad actors? Like, what are the worst case scenarios, and is there a reason to include a prevention against the worst case scenario within the charter? Is it an appropriate charter response? And I'm not hearing a lot of clarity from this group on whether that is. I've heard folks who say that it is appropriate to create a charter response to the worst case scenario, and folks who disagree. Anyone like to comment on that question? Derek, please.
The best I could think of would be wholly unpopular. I think that both former mayors, both of the gentlemen from the city, as well as Councillor Shaw, seem to be of the opinion that the city is judicious in its use of increasing revenue sources and through, you know, various aspects. And so I'm prepared really just to leave it alone. And if we want to leave this out of the charter, it seems like you know, the best I could think of would be some sort of chained CPI of sorts, right? Assigning it to some sort of index and chaining it so that it has both the ability to ratchet up as well as down. I don't know how we would incorporate that into this. I don't know whether that would be worth really refining through this process. So, you know, I'm actually prepared just to move forward and leave the charter absent or silent on this topic. So.
Thank you, Derek. Jason, please.
Just reflecting, Kim, on what you said, and then as Derek was speaking, I guess something that would make sense to me, sort of practically and even from an academic standpoint, would be conceptual. This is a concept. I don't know exactly how to put it in action, but let's talk about it for a moment. Would be getting at the bad actor. Okay, so you have a bad actor. What a bad actor would do in this situation would presumably be increasing rates at an unreasonable, undefendable rate for reasons that don't make any logical sense. And I would think we could create a protection about that. You know, maybe it's easier to recall members of the council if someone can make a bona fide case that there's, you know, rate increases are not defensible by the actual expenses. I don't know. It's a concept, nothing more than a concept, but just like when I'm thinking about what I would really want to be able to do, I think that's what it would be. That's what I would want. I'd want to check and balance on sort of something that's totally indefensible numerically or financially, and is just sort of either a money grab or yeah, there's just no logic to it, and there's no basis for it. And I don't know how to get at that in real life, but that's a concept to think about.
Thank you for that, Jason. And Zachary, please.
So I have a question about, I heard something about how with the ordinances, if the public doesn't approve of it very well, there's a certain amount of signatures we need to put it up for debate so that we could have like a vote on it. How many signatures would that be again? Because I thought it was like 3,500 or something. That seems like a lot.
Yeah, it's between like 3,000 to 3,500.
Okay. Yeah, I was just thinking, is there a way we could decrease that a bit to, because like what's Tigard's population?
About 52,000, 53,000.
But voters is what really probably matters to this question.
Yeah, so the recall question is based on the number of voters who voted for the last governor. Is how that number is calculated, and that is set by state statute.
Oh, so we can't do anything about that.
We cannot change the state statute.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that's an awful lot of, because let's say there are, okay, I mean, I don't know to do this exactly in percentages, but you know, 3,000 signatures out of 52,000, that's a lot of signatures. That's at least over like 5% of Tigard that would have to, you know, be sign that against what Tigard's doing. So I don't know. It seems like it's too many signatures. So I was just wondering if there's a way to lower it to maybe 2,000 or 1,000 or something, 500, but maybe not, I guess. Because it's really what, 3,500 of the residents of Tigard. It can't be away from Tigard, right?
It must be people who are eligible to vote in Tigard for it. And that is true for anyone who is running for office or any measure that's brought to the Tigard ballot. And then it is set at 10% of folks who voted for the last governor. So it does not include all the other voters. And so about 30,000 folks voted in the last governor's election. So that's where that $3,000 number, or 3,000.
But that's only for recalls, Kim, right? That's what you're talking about is the recall number, or that would be a referendum too?
Referendum, I think, is 10%. I think recall is 15%, or I might be getting those mixed up, but they are different percentages.
And they're both set by state statute?
They're both set by state statute. Shelby, correct me if I'm incorrect.
Yeah, I forget the same number too, but they are, one is 10%, one is 15%.
I believe recall was higher. Nathan, please.
So real quickly, I'll just apologize. I have to duck out here momentarily. But on this particular question, my just general feeling has been, and currently still is, to keep limitations on these fees and charges in the charter to the absolute minimum we can without, or to the minimum we can that we think is politically viable, that won't create a backlash like we've talked about with Sherwood. I will also mention I sent an email to you, Kim, and Shelby with my thoughts on the preamble in case that's useful, but I will be dropping off in just a couple minutes here.
Appreciate that. Thank you. And then just because it's coming up a lot, I just wanted to bring a little bit of clarity around kind of what other cities are doing. Like, does every city have some sort of restriction similar to what Tigard had around high capacity transit? And what we found is there's about 9 cities of those 25 charters that we've been looking at that have some kind of restriction around fees and charges. For the most part, they are not like the Sherwood example. They're highly specific. So looking at, oh, the names are getting away from me. Like Wilsonville requires voter approval before the city is allowed to spend any money on City Hall. Because there was a backlash about spending money on a new City Hall. So usually if these are in place, and usually they are not, but if they are, they're usually highly specific and usually are similar to what we saw with high capacity transit in our charter, in that they are issue based on something that is very present right now. There are a couple of examples though, like John pointed out, there is Sherwood, which does prohibit any new tax charge or fee or increase of more than 2% without voter approval. And then Oregon City goes as far as to say you cannot even issue any bonds without voter approval, which really hamstrings a city's ability to raise money, especially to raise money quickly and take advantage of low interest rates. So just to provide some more clarity about what the universe looks like on these types of restrictions in Oregon right now. John, please.
Yeah, Derek, I just want to mention that you talked about COLA and cost of living adjustments. The council, when they see the fines and fees and all those schedules and what the increase should be, part of it, like Jason said, it has to do with cost of service for a building inspector. And a lot of it has to do with what the COLA is. So we actually see different COLAs each year. There's a COLA statewide, there's a COLA West, and so on and so forth. So we actually see those. And so those are actually brought to the council each year to look at those to go up or down on fees. And sometimes they go up, sometimes they go down. Usually up, but that's the way it goes. What I wanted to comment just a little bit, but I agree, for the most part, is we really shouldn't stick something in here that will hamstring us. I don't think we should put anything in here. I'm just worried, like I've said before, is how do we do something to make sure we don't get people referring things? And so I'll go back to the Park and Rec. And so the reason that I voted against the Park and Rec fee for your utility bill was not the park part of it. So the park part to me is like the road part. It's maintaining what you already have. It's paying the insurance and the maintenance so it doesn't cost us more in the future. It was the rec part because we didn't have a recreation program. And so if you look at Beaverton, their recreation program is separately funded. The people get to vote on it. So my point was, if Tigard wants a recreation program, it should be voted on separately. So if it's just a maintenance fee of the city, I'm for the park maintenance fee. It's when the rec part came in. And I know some people like rec and more people are like, why don't we have this? It's because Tualatin Hills Park and Rec fee is higher than our permanent rate for our city. And so that's the kind of thing is people don't understand is, we have the second lowest permanent rate in the county of any full service city. And so, there are Park and Rec districts out there that are higher than our permanent rate cities. So it's the kind of thing is, I know Measure 5 and 50 messed everything up and it froze everybody what they were at. And unfortunately, we were at a really low level and everybody else was at a higher level. So everybody else in the county is pretty much over $5. So with the exception of Tualatin being the only other low one. So it's the kind of thing is we can't change that, but I'm just worried about every time we add a fee in, because even on the police one, so it took us 2 tries to get the police levy, but there was still talk of, well, we can always put a fee on the utility bill. Well, Gresham and a few other cities have done that. So that's my worry is when something doesn't pass, will the council say, well, we need to do something. We're going to put a fee forward. So it's the kind of thing is I don't want to hamstring the council. I just want to be cautious on when we do things, because I think too many things is when we get the backlash.
Thanks, John. And Jeanette, please.
Actually, I'd love to yield my time to Margaret because she hasn't spoken yet.
Thank you. You want me to speak? And actually, this goes back to Zachary's comment about lowering the amount of signatures. I think that really hurts the integrity of what the process is. For people to go through and get signatures to, do something like this is a very, very serious thing to do. And so I think it's more important to go through and make sure that you have the integrity of X percent of people who have been voting, who voted for the governor, who have been involved, as opposed to lowering it so more people can just sign a piece of paper. And so that was just my comment about keeping the levels for either recalls or, petitions or whatever at the level they have now. In fact, we've talked about this in the legislature, and I actually wanted it higher, but that didn't go through. So that's just my comment.
Thanks, Margaret. I like the context. Zachary, please.
I don't know. I was just thinking about the signature stuff. It was like, to me, it just seems virtually impossible to get that many signatures. Even, how would you know they participated in the last election, all that as a registered voter and everything? And you're going, you couldn't do it door to door. They wouldn't even really, they'd probably just not answer.
So they didn't have to participate in the last election or decide. You just have to be a registered voter, period. It's just the last governor's election is how that calculation is done. And I don't know how many signatures it takes to run for elected office, but I know we've got some elected officials here who have collected many, and there's processes around it that folks use.
It's pretty easy to get signatures. So
outside the grocery store.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, but I was gonna say, I guess I was wrong about that. I didn't really know the full scope of it. I guess it could be possible if with enough determination and effort. I was just thinking that even though we shouldn't have any really, because we weren't thinking of putting any sort of limit on how much they can raise the fees and stuff, but I feel like the reason why Sherwood did 2% was because on average, I think inflation is around 2%. And so they're trying to adjust for inflation. That way they don't go too high without voter approval, which kind of makes sense to me, but I understand why it can be controversial. So I was saying, what if we do something where it's not like super high, but not super low, where we do it at like 5% or something? Because you never really need to go above 5% anyway, because inflation's generally averaged at like 2% a year.
So generally, inflation has been historically low for the last several years until we came to just the last couple, and now inflation has been enormous, which
8%.
Yeah, so it's definitely a variable. Jason, please.
So just for a second, Zachary, I'm gonna kind of talk a little bit more, extend what you just asked about for a moment, just for illustration. I think the general concept you just proposed would kind of make sense a lot of the time, but there are times when it doesn't work. So Tigard had historically had extremely low water rates, really low water rates up until about 2007 or 8, when we were getting ready and knew we were going to have to build the Lake Oswego Tigard water project to provide us with our own water source that we owned. That didn't go online until 2016, but we started collecting revenue for it and changed water rates in like 2006 and 7, maybe 8. I was on the budget committee before I had become an elected official at that time. And that was like, we were preparing for it. And those were not 5% increases. We wouldn't have gotten the project done with 5% increases. Unfortunately, to get the project done, we had to do, if you took the total amount over like a 4 or 5 year period of time, it just about doubled what our very low rates were. Now, what we get out of that is a permanently sustainable water source that we own and control, and we now own, we have our own destiny in our own hands, right? So to me, that was worth taking that bite and saying, okay, we're going to suck it up and do this now, because this is much better than dealing with what cities who are now having to pay Portland for water are dealing with, which would be twice as much as what we're paying now and not have control. So like, yes, 5% logically makes sense maybe a lot of the time, but there are these situations where that just doesn't, it's not the right, it wouldn't be the right thing to do from my perspective, from a public policy perspective, because you wouldn't be able to act on that. Now we would have rates that are, you know, double that and not own our own water source. And I'm always looking for the right the right decision in the long term, even if it requires small pain in the short term. And that's a perfect example of that. The other thing I wanted to check on with the city, and I don't think we should add anything to the charter. So I just want to say that, but I'm also trying to give Zachary's ideas full consideration. And so Shelby, question for you. Normally, the way state law is written, we can be more restrictive, but not less restrictive. So in this case, wouldn't more restrictive mean less signatures? Couldn't we say, for not the recall, like forget the recall for a moment, but couldn't we say that if there was a rate increase over 5% for something, we could lower the threshold to like 500 signatures, for example, or something like that?
Yeah, so I had that same thought and I just pulled up the statute. So usually if that's the case, it says something like unless otherwise provided by the local jurisdiction or something like that. This statute doesn't have any of that wiggle room. It just says the requisite number of signers on a recall petition is 15%. So I was doing a quick Google search to see if I could find any city that had a different number, and I haven't so far. So I would need to look into that to see if that would be legal.
And we can't have a referendum part of our own charter for increases over a certain percent?
So the charters that I've seen all mirror state law. So I haven't found anybody that does something different. So I can keep looking, but not to my knowledge.
Thank you for adding that info.
Something else to keep in mind if the goal is to avoid a Sherwood-like situation, this has come up before, is ways to make it very difficult or more difficult for a charter amendment. Thinking about kind of these individual-led, maybe outside of Tigard charter amendments that have been introduced. And I know that we've talked about those being really funded by outside of the city, but they did have a chief petitioner who was a resident of Tigard. It's the only way to get it on the ballot. But there are charters that have restrictions that say things like, in order for a charter amendment to be passed, it must pass with 60% of the vote rather than 50%, or require that the charter amendment be put on the ballot at certain times of the year. So require that it be a November election. So when we're thinking about that other things, if our goal is to prevent the Sherwood, those might be options to consider. Karen, please.
Yeah, my concerns are less about bad actors in the future and more that if we don't change the fixed rate, it's just going to continue to be a problem and get worse. And so it's going to force the council to increase the street fees and the parks fees. I mean, like Jason said, there won't be any choices. That we got to get the work done. We got to get the money from somewhere. And I guess that's where I don't know. I really want to change the fixed rates, and I don't want to say that that's impossible because we got them in place. We should be able to change them with a lot of work, I know. But also if we were going to do some kind of percent, I don't think COLA is the way to go, because what the city spends its money on is not what individuals spend their money on. It would have to be linked to increases in cost to maintain our streets, cost to maintain our parks, cost to maintain our police equipment, some other percentage that's linked more to those kinds of costs than to COLA.
Thanks, Karen. And it's an interesting point that you bring up, because construction costs have far exceeded COLA increases.
In on that, so our street maintenance fee specifically is tied to a construction index, not just COLA, or not to COLA.
Thanks, Eric. So Zachary and then Jeanette, and then we'll pause for a second. So Zachary, go ahead.
Thank you all for your comments. I really appreciate it. Especially Snyder's. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to figure out a method to where we can best support everything and everyone. But I mean, it just feels weird because it's like you want to be restrictive, but at the same time, you don't know if you're being too restrictive or not. And it's like, yeah, just a really tough problem to solve. And I hope we come up with a solution that we can pretty much all agree on. Yeah, even if it doesn't change anything or does. I'm still happy we're talking about it at least.
Thank you, Zachary. This is a fantastic conversation. I'm glad we're having it. Thank you for saying that. Jeanette, please.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. I agree with Derek that I don't necessarily think we'd have to have something into the charter, and I don't want to overload our preamble, but listening to both John and Jason, is there some way we could add something within the preamble? And just throwing it out there, and that if that ends up being too much, I recognize that, but just thought I'd suggest it.
Something like that's not tying the city to anything, but laying out like a value of financial judiciousness.
Yes, which the city has and could continue. And anyway.
Or that generally the charges should be reflected in the cost of like what it actually costs to do something. I mean, things like that. Jeanette, is that what you had in mind?
Yeah, something along those lines, but also recognizing time short. I don't know how long that would take to draft, to include, to agree upon.
Maybe like a high level value of some kind. All right, so what I've heard from this group is generally a well-founded concern for folks who are kind of going off and adding all sorts of fees and charges, but not necessarily a consensus that this is a charter problem that needs a charter solution. We've had some kind of ideas thrown out there around like maybe a 5% or a chain CPI, but no, it doesn't seem like there's any consensus forming around anything. Are folks feeling okay about leaving this conversation here as something that was well discussed, that we will also mention this to council during the presentation, that this was something that came up, and moving on with our agenda this evening? Tony, please.
For me, the concern is less about a bunch of increases, but where it goes, because typically people don't just randomly increase rates for the sake of raising rates, and typically people aren't so much upset. I mean, granted, nobody wants to have their rates and taxes and fees increased to an amount that they feel is unfair, but it's typically tied to where that money goes. And my concern that when I see the financial side is those instances where council have made the news because they decided to take from the public coffers and line their own pockets. That's a really bad look for city councils, and it makes the populace a little bit stressed out. At least that's kind of how I approach the fiscal responsibility side of it. So I don't know if there's really a place in here, or if there's some sort of control of where the increases can go. I think that innately restricts the temptation to have a large increase. So I don't know if that's a concept to maybe bring in, because I tend to fall on the prevention side and bad actor side. So that's just kind of where my mind goes with this.
So Tony, are you saying that your primary concern is with basically council members giving themselves raises?
Or otherwise putting funds where someone else profits from them that shouldn't, like family members getting contracts, and just how that money is delegated that's raised.
Shelby, do you want to talk to some of the kind of restrictions that are around that exist?
Yeah, so definitely state ethics law prevents that. A counselor cannot vote on anything that would be that would give them a financial benefit or avoidance of a financial detriment. That also applies to family members, and that is all codified in state statute. Additionally, as Jason mentioned earlier, there is the requirement that a fee has to be related to the cost of service. And so courts have said that if it's not tied directly to the cost of service, that it's a tax, not a fee. And so there's a different process for that. In terms of enacting, you can't just enact a tax by itself. So there are currently already checks in place that would prevent a counselor from doing that. And a counselor cannot vote on their own compensation either. That's also covered by state ethics law.
Thanks, Shelby. And that it was also included in our charter, which is how counselor compensation is set. Derek, please.
There's a specific issue that I was thinking of as we were running through this, and it took place within the last year, and it was that the trash pickup fees were being renegotiated. And this was when Jason was still the mayor, and we had a liaison from the city that was engaging with Pride. And there were contractual revenue requirements in there, right? That the Pride had to make between 8 and 12% approximately. I don't remember the exact figures. And they had made 14 or something in that ballpark range. And the recommendation from the gentleman from either from Pride or from the city, I don't remember who it was, recommended that we increase rates anyways. And the rationale that was provided for it had nothing to do with the city not meeting its contractual obligation to make sure that Pride made a certain level of revenue. It was just that people don't like sudden rate increases, and therefore we should simply raise the rates so that we can do so incrementally over a period of time. Now, Jason, very much to his credit, did not find that compelling, and the council ended up voting that down. And so they didn't move forward. So I very much agree that there's a judicious, there's a judicious factor here, right? That should be, that we entrust our public officials to try to suss this out and to prevent that sort of nonsense from making its way through. So, but this is where my mind goes as we're going through this, is that it's not bad actors necessarily, it's incompetent actors or people who, just generally speaking, would like to rob the public coffer at a quick opportunity when they see that there's a chance to do so. And so, I'm not really conspiratorial in this way, just more so thinking that that is kind of the general nature of this discussion as I see it, and thought I would provide that additional context.
Thanks, Derek. Appreciate that. And Zachary, please.
Yeah, I mean, to add to Derek's comment, I feel like it isn't really that like the people who get involved in government, because it's a long and tedious process to try to, get elected and stuff. They never really want to harm people most of the time. It's more of like, they're probably just looking for a quick way to make ends meet. And if they're not making enough money, then, it pushes them like pre-distribution towards things they normally wouldn't do, or just incompetence because they're not really like fully aware of what they're really voting on sometimes. And that's why I strive so passionately to get all the facts and all the information kind of out, even though it's maybe a bit tedious, just because it's better to know what you're voting on rather than vote on what you don't know on. Because at the end of the day, because then at least you're happy knowing you won't regret it in the future if you didn't find out what you were actually voting on.
Thanks, Zachary. And I think going back to both Derek and Zachary's excellent points, I know our charter committee is soon coming to an end, but I hope this does not end your period of involvement in Tigard's government and Tigard's budget processes. And we'll talk about this more in our next meeting, but staying involved in even the charter process, because this is just the first effort. The next effort is actually getting it passed with the voters. So staying involved and watching. So are we comfortable moving forward? Thank you for the fantastic conversation, the very thoughtful considerations. Steve and Eric, I think we can bid you good night while we talk about the preamble.
Thanks to all of you again. Appreciate it. Thanks for the questions.
Thanks,
Yep.
Steve and Eric.
See ya.
Bye.
So preamble time. And I think last Thursday we sent 3 different kind of options. Very, very much in the draft stage, the preambles. So I'll just share those tonight. And kind of the goal is to get impressions. What did or didn't resonate? So the first one of we the people of Tigard, Oregon, affirm that we are a community of people who uphold the inherent value of every individual within our city. Further, we exercise our power to the fullest extent possible under the Constitution, laws, and the state of Oregon, and enact this home rule charter. So affirming the community, upholding the inherent value, and then speaking to home rule. The second one, we the people of Tigard, Oregon, in order to affirm the value of every individual within our community, do exercise our power to the fullest extent possible in the Constitution and laws of the state of Oregon, and enact this home rule charter. Again, just a different emphasis. And then the third is we the people of Tigard, Oregon, are a community that recognizes the value of all individuals. We exercise our power to the fullest extent possible under the Constitution and laws of the state of Oregon, and enact this home rule charter. And we even got one more from Nathan that I'm going to copy over that he had to leave, but he also rewrote a version I want to include. I think he also made a very good point in his email to us, which said that he thought it was inverted and he preferred to reduce the emphasis on individual and increase the emphasis on community and collective action. And so his version was, we the people of Tigard, Oregon, join as individuals to establish a shared community, exercise our power to the fullest extent possible under the Constitution and laws of the state of Oregon. And Jason, I think I saw your hand go up. Oh, you're holding up for 3. Other folks, 3, 4. All right, here I see a 4. I see a lot of 3s. I see 1, 1. I don't see any 2s. Oh, there's 1, 2. Carol, please. I feel like an auctioneer right now.
Still can't, you still can't get the camera to work. I like 3.
3.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I only saw 1 hand up for 1 and 1 hand up for 2. So are we comfortable removing those from the category? Oh, Karen is saying absolutely not. I think Karen was a 1 vote. Karen, would you like to share what about 1 is speaking to you?
Well, it's interesting that it does use the word community. 3 just seems so blunt or curt or and maybe that's what people like about it, is that it's fewer words, but the 2 sentences just aren't tied at all for me to just say, yep, everybody has value. And then that's it. And I just really, when I kept rereading them, I just really liked the first sentence of number 1, discussing the community and upholding. I didn't like number 2 because of the in order to. I don't think we're doing this in order to affirm the value, but we wanted to acknowledge the value, but it won't be the first time I'm outvoted.
Thanks for sticking around, Karen. Appreciate your voice. Jason, please.
Now I don't even want to make my comment because I'm going to hurt Karen's feelings, not on purpose, but like, I guess what I would say is what appeals to me about 3 is the clarity and the succinctness of it. I do like that. I'm curious what's missing out of 3 that caused Nate to rewrite and give us 4 or dot, whatever I'm going to call it 4. I guess I'm just wondering, is there a thought that's now missing from 3 that he interjected in 4? If there is, I'm open to trying to figure that out. And I'm trying to take in Karen's comments because I don't want to just come behind and quash them. That was not my intent.
So from Nathan, he didn't like that community came first and individuals came second. He thought it should be reversed and that the individuals come together and form a community. And so that was his takeaway.
See, I think the community part is actually the more important part. So that's, I think I would prefer 3 for that, but I understand the argument both ways.
Thank you. Tony, please.
I agree with him on the order. I kind of like the idea that we would start with we, the community, we, the people of Tigard, recognize the value of all individuals, and we're a community. Kind of, I like that part. I don't like the join as individuals because that's not emphasizing a recognition of the value of individuals. So that's something, that change in the so if you look at 1, you've got inherent values of every individual. If you look at 2, you have the value of every individual. But what we lose from 4 is mentioning that the individual has value. And I think that's, to me, the spirit of that statement. I like his order. I just wish that we still had a recognition of the value of each individual citizen. But I had a question about the last "and." For me, as I read it, I guess it's kind of a Shelby question if this is a part of the legal part of it. But to me, the "and" part is to me, I feel like by enacting or something that changes the way that sentence ends would add more clarity to me. So since it's consistent, I'm thinking it probably has something to do with legalese, but I just kind of wanted to get some input on that part.
Well, it's kind of like the earlier comment that was made about "in order to." It's by enacting. That's not the reason why it's why we're enacting it. It was more just a recognition that it's one of the things that it does, but it's not the purpose of what it's doing. So it's not really legalese. It's more of just a style thing focused on the purpose and intent of it.
Shall we? And then just to clarify too, that last sentence came directly from the LOC example charter, which was also adopted by City of Beaverton. And then we're adding our own spin to it in the middle. Margaret, please.
I was again talking about number 3, and I think that the one thing is it's very succinct. First of all comes community, then comes individuals, and then is what you can do under a home rule or a home charter and that kind of thing. So I think that when you have something like a preamble, you want it as succinct as possible. And to me, number 3 is the one that at least for me reaches that goal. They're all very similar. That one was just a little more succinct.
Thanks, Margaret. And Zachary, please.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I feel like you could make 4 a lot better if you had the comma instead of the "and" laws, or even if, I don't know. I just thought it would be like better if it was like, "We, the people of Tigard, Oregon, recognize individuals to establish a shared community and exercise their power to the fullest extent possible under Constitution and laws of, the state of Oregon, and enact this home rule charter." I feel like it would be a lot better if it was that way, rather than just kind of join as individuals, because it's not like you could always join, but like at least recognize them, even if they're not part of it.
Like that? I'm not sure if that's grammatic anymore. Something that emphasizes that word.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, thanks, Zachary. We've got another option on the table. And Lindsay, please.
I was just going to say kind of for all the same reasons that Margaret said, but I think the important piece is the recognizing the value of all individuals, and the other ones kind of specify the individuals within the city or the individuals within the community. And And I think the point is really that our shared value as a community is that we recognize the value of everyone. So that doesn't mean you have to live in Tigard for us to recognize your value. So I think that is maybe like a small but really important piece. So that's why I'm for number 3.
Lindsay. And Jeanette, please.
I'm willing to change to 3. I've been swayed by the simplicity, and also to Karen's point about the affirm, I agree with that on 2, but also that's what bothered me about the first one was affirm, and then the inherent value of every individual just seemed like, what is inherent value? But so I'm willing to be swayed to 3.
And just as a note while drafting, kind of messing around with different words between recognizes, affirms, upholds, and establishes. All as synonyms with some differences, and so understand that folks are really gravitating towards that recognized word. And Carol, please.
Yeah, remember last time we talked about this and I brought up the word equity,
Yes.
which some people thought might not be the best, but I feel very good about number 3, and I think that says equity. And it also doesn't say just individuals in our city. And I think the extra words, joining together, that sort of thing, just aren't necessary. I just think it's really clear. And at first I thought, oh, maybe that's a little choppy, but it gets the job done. I like it.
Thanks, Carol. And Zena, please.
I like the third one as it looks pretty much perfect for me.
Thanks, Zena. And Zachary.
Yeah, I mean, I just thought it'd be better if it was of Tigard, Oregon recognizes individuals, and I'd just kind of get rid of the as. But I mean, to be honest, I was okay with 3 too. I thought 3 would be good, but I thought 4 was just trying to say it in a little bit nicer way, as first they're recognizing individuals rather than we are a community. So it's like everyone's individual as part of the community rather than the community recognizes all individuals. So it's like more joining together rather than a higher form of power. It just sounds less authoritarian to me. That's the whole reason why I wanted 4 or 5. Yeah.
Thanks, Zachary. Margaret, please.
Well, I was going to say, we could reword it saying, we, the citizens of Oregon, in order to create a more perfect, no, we don't have to do that.
I can pull back up the other preambles. Derek, please.
I like 3, but if it speaks to Nathan's, we, the people of Tigard, Oregon, recognize the value of all individuals in our community. You could simply switch those 2 for number 3. That would address his deal where he just says, he likes the fact of individuals coming together to form the community. It's equally as succinct. So, and that wouldn't bother me, that type of a change.
I am just pointing this out, breaking my rule that we've done so far, which has been no line editing on these meetings. But it's our second to last. Wait, how did you phrase that, Derek? We, the people of Tigard, Oregon, recognize the value of all individuals
in our community.
In our community. Has anyone been swayed to number 6 from number 3? Jason, please.
I mean, as I just read 6, I feel like we lose the sort of community, the sense of community that 3 brings, and I think that matters a lot to who we are. So I understand the wordsmithing and I understand what it means. It just doesn't. I don't think it emphasizes the community component, because the first sentence just says we recognize the value of all individuals in our community. It doesn't really say anything about community.
Thank you, Jason. And Tony, please.
I actually do prefer 6 now, and kind of to that point, I kind of feel like it does emphasize it maybe more so than is reasonable to assume. It assumes a little more because to me, I read it as we, the people of Tigard, basically saying all of us as a group recognize the value of all individuals in our community. So to me, we, the people of Tigard, to me is a statement that says our community, because we are the people of Tigard. This is our community. To me, it's basically making assumption that everyone in the city of Tigard values all individuals, which, you know, is not necessarily true. Not everybody values everyone else. We'd like it to be that way, but that's not how the world works. But to me, I read it as more of an emphasis on, and we're actually to the point of the word community, we're de-emphasizing the word community, but we're kind of incredibly emphasizing the concept that we are a consistent mind in our community. To me, that's how I read it. So I like the order of operations. To me, there's a little more of an emphasis on a unimind than we probably have in our city. But I like the idea that all of us, every single person in our city would value every other single individual in our community. I think that's a nice way to view the world. So I actually prefer 6, but I'm a 3 or a 6. So.
Thanks, Tony. I would say, I think the preamble and the other preambles that we read when it talks about values are aspirational at heart. Lindsay, did you have your hand up a second ago?
I was just going to reiterate that I really think it's important to say that as a community, we value all individuals, and not to say that we only value the individuals in our community. So I think it's a little wordsmithing, but like conceptually, they're fundamentally very different things. And I think we should be a place where everyone feels welcome, regardless of if they actually live in Tigard or not. So that's just something I feel strongly about, but I also feel ready to vote on this too.
I want to see if maybe we can avoid a vote on the preamble. So we got 3 more comments. Zachary?
Yeah, I mean, it just makes sense to me because, yeah, it's either 3 or 6, right? But I just like 6 because it's like, you know, we recognize the value of individuals in our community. So if you're an individual and you're in our community right now, then we recognize your value rather than like, you know, we are a community that recognizes the value of all individuals. So it's like, hey, we're a community, but we recognize your value, but we're still a community rather than we're individuals and we're part of this community. That's how I see it. But 6, yeah.
And Tony, please.
I have a question largely, I guess, for Lindsay and Jason and people approaching it. Would perhaps removing and I guess also if it's a legalese question too, but would you consider we the community of Tigard, or because I know you want the word community, would it be stronger to say we the people of Tigard, just flatly kind of speaking to that strong emphasis that this is just a fact, you know, this is in the city of Tigard, this is just the way it is kind of concept of we, the people of Tigard, Oregon, recognize the value of all individuals, and strike just period. If you're in Tigard, this is the way we are. It's not just about community. This is who Tigard is as a city, period. We just value all individuals. Or changing it to we, the community of Tigard, and then say the community of Tigard, Oregon, recognize the value of all individuals. So that way, community is the first part of it. We're saying the community of Tigard, which would necessarily involve people, because we're not a community without people. So that's just my question, and it would also significantly shorten it, and we like concise. So that was my question, and I'm trying to honor the spirit of people's position on this.
Margaret, please.
Okay, first of all, I wholeheartedly agree with what Lindsay said, and I think it's very, very important. But there's one thing that we have to realize is that the charter deals with the people who actually live in Tigard. People don't always think about this, but we probably have close to 35,000 people a day that come in to work in Tigard that don't live here. And even though they work here and they whatever, they are part of a community. And so I think that that's, something we need to realize is that that's what it is. But I'm again totally with number 3. It says what we want to say, and I agree with what Lindsay said earlier.
Thanks, Margaret. All right, Derek will be our, all right, Jeanette will be our last comment on this topic this evening. Derek, please.
Yeah, just to comment on it. I mean, it doesn't really matter to me necessarily either way, but I definitely suggested it with a feeling of inclusiveness rather than exclusiveness. If you physically happen to just simply be present within Tigard, or you're passing through, like you're among and within the community of Tigard, and we recognize your value. I don't think that we're necessarily excluding somebody who doesn't live in the state of Oregon, for example. Like, just because you live elsewhere doesn't mean that we don't see your inherent value. I think we're just emphasizing the fact that we're a community coming together, and we recognize the value of the individuals in the community. I definitely didn't see the other interpretation. I can see it at this point now that a few people have raised it, but it wasn't the spirit in which I suggested it.
Thank you, Derek. And Jeanette, please.
I was just thinking, I appreciate Margaret's comments. I actually think we have about 100,000 people coming in a day. So it's significantly more than the 35,000. So without voting, I think 3 with community first sounds great.
If it is not unanimous, then we will certainly take a vote. I just, in the spirit of the preamble, if it is unanimous, that would be good. So are folks comfortable with 3? If anyone is not comfortable with 3, then we will go to a vote.
I'd like a vote. I like 6.
Okay, let's go to a vote. So we're not going to vote on which of the 6 options. It seems that 3 has a high amount of consensus. So I would suggest that we vote yes on 3 or no, and then we go back to our options. Does that make sense to everybody?
Mm-hmm.
And we have, I think, 10 voting members with us this evening. So this is what you're voting. So yes is adopt, no is not adopt. And with 10 members, we will need 8 to vote in favor in order for this to pass. So starting at the top, Carol Krager.
Yes.
Derek Lawson.
No, in the spirit of difficulty.
If it's 3 people who are no, I'll remember you. Jason Snyder.
Yes.
Jeanette Shaw.
Or yes.
John Cook.
Yes.
Karen Emerson.
No.
Lindsay Murphy.
Yes.
Margaret Doherty.
Yes.
Nathan is absent. Tony Simpson.
Yes.
And Zachary Claremont.
Abstain.
Are you actually abstaining? We'd really prefer.
That'll have the same effect as a no vote, Zachary, just I think so you're clear.
Yeah, I just don't think I have any effect on the vote.
You do.
Oh, yes, you do.
You have
Yeah, but like even if I do vote, like I know either way we're just gonna adopt 3.
No, we won't
No.
adopt a preamble if you don't vote yes. That's where we're at right now.
Oh, well then no.
I'll change mine to 3. Yes. So I like 3 just fine. We're good.
Yeah, 3. We'll take 3.
Okay.
Okay, well, I think that's a vote of 9-1, and I'm glad everyone's feeling a little punchy on this Monday night. We have adopted preamble number 3. You will see that in your next charter shell. And with that, so we go into our last meeting next Monday. We will spend quite a bit of their time kind of going through the charter for last looks. So if you haven't had a chance to deep read the latest shell, please take a look. We're going to talk about what next steps look like with this group, including we're going to council in September, and we'd love to have as many of you join us as possible, as well as a couple of volunteers to speak to council. So think about that and your interest in continuing with this process. And then we'll just save some time at the end for folks to share kind of how this has been for everybody. And Margaret, please.
What date is that in September where we would take it to the city council?
Oh, you asked such good questions that I'm not prepared for. Let me look.
It's going to be after like the 2nd of September. It's not going to be at the beginning of the month.
No, it is September 19th is when we're
Thank you
going.
very
Yep. September 19th. Charter meetings, council meetings start at 6:30. All right, with that, everybody, thank you for another evening of fantastic conversation. Have a great night.
Okay, thank you.